You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia. Welcome everyone to the Road to Wisdom podcast. We've had a very racy start to this, and unfortunately you're not all going to hear it, but today we have Jalal Khan and Clayton in the studio today to do a round two with Jalal, but also to
talk about the birth of the quantum kid.
Yes, the quantum kid. That's where my brain was blanking.
Yeah,
thank you.
We should probably just note the fact that we're like in almost 30 weeks pregnant, haven't had a chat for a while, so this might be, you guys might be actually leading this conversation.
So how did you guys meet?
So yeah, but
and it's really hot in Byron today. We've got some serious
sauna
weather happening in the studio. We're under artificial lights, which I feel shamed about.
Because we're going to all tell you not to be doing that kind of stuff in this chat.
We're doing it in the daytime though, so it's somewhat forgivable, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
True.
Go have a download after this.
True. But anyway, we would love to just chat about the birth of the quantum kid first.
Yeah, take it to that. I know that a lot of our listeners have been tuning in to the quantum kid.
Awesome.
And we did have lots of questions as well. I guess about oral ties and structural work. People who obviously didn't know about this kind of work prior to going down those paths of correcting things. So yeah, I guess if we can go into that and how the quantum kid came to be and how it's going, I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So I received an email one day from a gentleman up in Byron by the name of Clayton, and it was signed Cole, cranial osteopath, and basically he was criticizing my work. And so being a typical dentist, I didn't like what I read, so I just archived the email. No, that's not true. I didn't archive it. I didn't archive it.
I didn't like your work, that's true.
So,
I think the best friendships form from a similar story.
Yeah, 100%. But no, the romance of the way that the quantum kid was born was actually a patient that brought us together. She was and she's local to Byron, and she was quite adamant about the fact that Cole and I just had to talk. And we had a few other mutual friends who were also saying the same things. Cole was treating some patients who I was treating, and vice versa. So when you have patients kind of see the potential that two clinicians can have when they work together, it's pretty cool just to think about that. So once Cole and I got talking, to be fair, it was still him that reached out again. So I was playing hard to get.
No, I didn't do it because Lauren insisted.
Yes.
One of our mutual friends, she said, I'm not taking no for an answer. You have to talk to this guy.
So we should have Lauren in here, is what you're saying.
You should have Lauren in here for she's a wealth of knowledge regarding birthing outside the system and all that type of stuff.
Sounds like our kind of person.
I think we found the right podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when Cole reached out, we just started chatting on Instagram, and very quickly we realized that there was a lot of synergy in our values behind why we were wanting to do what we wanted to do. And obviously the way we were going about doing things was a little bit, different, because I was still stuck in my silo as a dentist and just focusing on the jaws, and Cole knew a lot about the jaws, but was obviously working mainly on the cranium and other important parts of the body. So once we sat down and actually understood what each other was doing, it was kind of okay, wow, if we combine, we can really turn a 1 + 1 = 2 into a 1 + 1 = 5 for our adults that we treated, but also more importantly, the children. And so that was really the birth of the quantum kid, because it was, I guess from my perspective, I really wanted to, both of us to have skin in the game and commit to each other, from a time perspective, from a values perspective, from a business perspective, because more often than not when dentists work with manual therapists, they usually have the manual therapist kind of come in and act as a contractor or a consultant and do work with the patients, whereas I wanted Cole to actually be a part of the business, like a partner of the business, so that we're both committing to each other. And I think that's one thing that Cole and I are really proud about, is the fact that we've both gone in together, and we're not shy of telling our patients that, because when they see commitment between two practitioners, they know that these guys aren't going anywhere. Because what if you start treatment with Jalal and Cole and, 3 months later they have a biff and, they've gone separate ways? Like, that's not going to happen because of just how aligned we are.
Yeah, 100%. It goes deeper than that, though. Can you tell the Mecca story or not?
Yeah, of course I can.
Yeah. The poverty and...
Yeah, so 12 months ago, I was seriously considering walking away from dentistry. And the reason for that was I'd become so disillusioned with mainstream health, but also dentistry, because I use the word centralized, meaning like basically you're just practicing the type of dentistry that you're taught at an institution or a university. And so centralized dentistry is really just focused on teeth. They're not thinking about how the teeth are held in by jaws and how the jaws are like related to the cranium, etc. And so I was bored. I felt disillusioned. I felt like I was lacking inspiration in my professional career, and I wasn't fully expressing myself as a healer, if I may be as bold as to say that. And so one of the things, I'm a fairly devout Muslim, and so one of the things which we do regularly is we go back to Mecca. So there's a Hajj pilgrimage, which is, we didn't do it at the time of Hajj, but we still went back, and it's a different type of pilgrimage called the Umrah pilgrimage. And when you go to Mecca, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that two things will happen. Your sins will be erased, all your past sins, as if you are reborn from your mother. And the second thing that happens is that God removes poverty from your life. And the poverty isn't necessarily financial poverty. It could be mental poverty. It could be relationship poverty. Anything that you're struggling with in life, God will remove it for you. And I'm not the type of person that kind of goes into detail about the types of blessings or things that I want from God. I kind of just pray to God, please give me what you feel is best for me. And that's all I used to say or pray when I was there. And so I came back from Mecca, and God removed my professional poverty and presented me with a 6'3" white Australian man.
I always say white Christian guy, which is just shows you that God's got a sense of humour. Right?
That's it.
I love that story. And I didn't actually know that story till I had signed up already. I was already committed, and then he told me that story.
Yeah.
I love that. So basically that was kind of like the revamping of or the inspiration or the motivation to kind of go in a different direction and be like, okay, there's like actually something new here. This is what I'm actually going to be doing.
Yeah, it's something new, but it's also something old. I think Cole and I would agree that this type of work that we're doing is like decades old. It's just been written out of dentistry.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because it's a slow way of doing things. It's a beautiful way of doing things, but it takes time and it takes love. And in a commercial world that we live in, where everything's focused on extracting as many dollars as we can from the time that we used to work, this type of care is not conducive to, corporate dentistry. I mean, corporate dentistry itself is like a whole nother topic, a whole nother podcast. But if we have time, we'll go there. But yeah,
yeah. Well, I do feel like that's in so many of the different modalities that we've been looking at. Like when you go into that slower healing process, it's not a quick fix. It's not a pill. It's not a cream. It's not whatever. It's like we're actually doing real work here, but you won't get those symptoms back, or you won't. We can actually make some serious change, and I feel like that's something that runs across.
One thing that always strikes me is that sometimes it just seems too simple. Like the whole thing is it can't work because it's just really, is it really just that simple? It can't be. I'm not going to waste my time or money on this. That's what I find with so many people.
Yep.
And I kind of feel like, and I could be wrong, and I don't want to minimize the quantum kit too much, but it is simple, right? So I want to hear like what is a quantum kit, or what is it that you do?
It's so simple, and the real point of it is the body grows innately. Like the body heals itself innately. You get a cut, it'll heal itself. You don't sit there worrying all night like, oh, is that Band-Aid working? Like, so you just go, oh, I cut myself, and you go, oh, stop bleeding now, and you forget about it, right?
I would argue that there are many parents out there who
Parents, I was talking about
Yeah.
self. Parents different, especially the first one. Does it need stitches? Should we go to hospital?
everything, anything
there.
that happens, and especially if there's like blood involved, you're like, oh my God, it's going to get infected. They're going to lose an arm.
But but it heals, right? It heals, and that's the principle we're using. Like, you don't walk around and see people looking at kids' feet and going, oh no, they're going to be a size 12, but they're not size 12 now and they're only 8 years old. Do you know, it sounds ridiculous, but that's the sort of stuff we are hearing.
Yep.
And so it's just about respecting and being humble in the presence of those inherent growth forces that have got us this far, and that's as simple as it is, actually, Chloe. It's like, so sometimes the child might be a little bit off track on that, and they might need a little bit of help with that. But do they need a $10,000 appliance machine, multiple weekly treatments or whatever? No, it's just a nudge, and then we just keep checking and making sure they're nudging and they're coming back on course. And then in osteopathy, we call it, cranial osteopathy, which there's a delineation which you can talk about, but in cranial osteopathy, we call it the mechanism. The mechanism's got it, So there's old stories about that, old osteopaths, and the teacher says, no, the mechanism's got it. Like, the mechanism's taken over, and it doesn't look right, doesn't, just wait. And the mechanism takes over, and it does. And that's why it is that simple. Because actually, if take any kind of machine, like a dishwasher, for example, like you put the things in, you put the powder in, close the door, press the button, or you press the button, close the door, and you get up in the morning and dishes are washed. It's that simple. But there's a bunch of, if you think about the complexity behind that, there's a lot going on, right? I don't know how to...
But I'd also argue that, like, a dishwasher gets more and more disgusting, and you have to kind of maintain it a little bit.
Well,
like,
yeah.
sometimes something's out of alignment, and you kind of need to...
There's maintenance in a body
Nudge it.
too.
You
But
need
the
to
point
nudge
a
is...
little nudge, like, you're good now.
Dishwasher, anything. Point is, turn on your computer and it's nice bright colours. There's a lot going on behind that. There's networks, there's, all stuff. So it does look really simple, but what's actually behind that is infinitely complex.
And
Makes sense.
That mechanism actually, it dates back to when we have fertilization of the egg in utero. And so when we have fertilization, there's no placenta that's formed. There's nothing like that. So how is this developing embryo able to extract nutrients from the mother? So there's like a suction type of motion that develops between the fertilized egg that develops into an embryo and the uterine wall. And so that suction motion is actually, that's where life starts. So we say life is motion, right? There's always motion, there's always change. That's where it all starts. And so it's like the primary respiration that the fertilized egg and embryo has. And so that respiration has got nothing to do with oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's got everything to do with motion. So respiration really hinges on motion, and that's ebbing and flowing of motion through the different structures actually is maintained as the embryo grows into a fetus, and then from a fetus into this newborn baby which mum delivers. So how does that actually show in a child that mum is holding after giving birth? So the cranial bones, they're actually moving out and moving back in. They're flexing and extending against each other, and that is motion, right? And it's connected to the tailbone via this really tight membrane called the dura mater, which beautifully means tough mother. And so we've got the head literally connected to the tailbone, and the tailbone's moving rhythmically in sync with the head. And that is the motion, that primary respiratory mechanism that Cole and all cranial osteopaths talk about. Because when we have that mechanism, what happens is we have an optimal pumping of something called the cerebrospinal fluid, which wraps around the entire brain and spinal cord, and that cerebrospinal fluid pumps up and down the spine, back up into the brain, and so and so and so on and so forth. Cole and I believe, or we know that, can we believe or we know? It's a bit bold to say we know, but like
Pretty sure.
The
You're
body,
pretty
the
sure.
body's. I'm 99.99% sure that the body's innate healing capacity is held within the cerebrospinal fluid, and so when you get that pumping optimally, that's when kids start to heal. That's when kids start to grow optimally. That's when they start to reverse the inflammation that's inside of them. So that's the mechanism that we're talking about. So who are we to tinker with that? And that's what clinicians are doing globally, is they're starting to play God rather than actually just kind of trying to just take a step back and just turn a key there and do a little bit of a nudge there and allow the mechanism to take over.
That's what I say, because a lot of stuff, in my hands at least, is locking that mechanism up. That's the issue.
So what Cole's talking about is we might see...
So in layman's terms, everyone.
Interpret for me, yeah. He does that all the time. But that last passage was beautiful. Like you're talking like an accomplished cranial osteopath. I love it.
But what Cole's talking about is he sees kids that have been to dentists, well-intentioned, well-meaning, super well-trained dentists who are expanding kids to an arbitrary number of the distance between this back molar and this back molar has got to be 38 millimeters or 40 millimeters or something like that. And they go so quickly that they actually lock up the movement of the cranial bones. So they lock up that primary respiratory mechanism. And so then the kids, like, their heads are like literally a balloon that's about to pop. And Cole feels it. And literally he either starts to have steam coming out of his ears or he gets tears in his eyes because he knows that this kid is being wrecked unless we rescue the situation.
I'm so glad I didn't see either of those things when I brought my kid in.
100%.
Whew, it's not that bad. Oh, but
He cried after.
shit, guys, I'm gonna cry. No,
I'll cry with you.
no, I'm joking. But by the way, I'm so happy to use that as an example because I feel like
So many.
I always use my kid as an example for all of our chats because it's so real and it's something that's so big for me, like uncovering what the hell is going on. I've had so many people tell me it's 100% this, it's 100% this, like you have to do this.
But also your story is so common. Like
I know.
so many people who have tried to go down other like routes to
But how are you
attend
supposed
to
to
it.
know? Like it's taken me, I don't know, 15 years to even start to understand this stuff. And
Taking me 12.
what, 12 years of
Jalal's clearly the
tertiary?
smarter one around here. And he's going to make it known.
There's a principle in cranial osteopathy of humility. So
I'm not a cranial osteopath.
there's a principle in dentistry of ego.
I'm really seeing that come through there.
we can tell your background, Jalal.
But I think, just to be serious for a second, I think that the most important thing that I've gotten from this whole journey, and even just hearing that solidifies that my intuition and my knowing as the mum, I've second guessed that so many times on this path of really trying to figure out what's going on for her. And I just keep on saying, no, I'll try it, but it doesn't feel good. And it's been a bit of a battle. And like, who am I? I've always been like, well, who am I? I don't have these skills to, like, I didn't study for 10 years or 5 years or whatever. Like, how would I possibly know if this is the right thing? Because it seems like it could be, but but then it's always a feeling like this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel
And you're
right.
You're right.
And so maybe that's it. So there's a lot of parents out there who are like, oh, I just don't know, but I'm desperate. Like they've told me my kid will, I mean, I've been told that Birdie will have like leukemia and like wild stuff of if I don't do something about this now.
I think to be kind to you and anyone who has gone down that what is it?
The
Jaw
expansion. Yeah.
Path. It is like we are a generation of mums who are trying to grow our intuition back after however long of having it shut
But it's
down
been
over
there,
and
it's
over
there,
again.
but it's
Well
not
said.
we're going to trust it.
Really
on
well
that.
said.
Yeah, so I still it's so hard to know, and I think everyone needs to be a little bit kind to themselves.
We're just trusting. Trust.
But also,
I'm cool with
I
it,
mean,
but I'm like, why don't I just trust myself?
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah, and
But
it's a learning.
but that voice, that you know, hang on, this is talk about the birth of the quantum kid. The quantum kid, a big part of what it's built on is actually respecting that. Guarantee from the very start. I said to Jalal, you watch, like, mums will come in and they know that what they've been told, X, Y, and Z, yeah, it sort of makes sense, and yeah, it's kind of, but it just doesn't fit,
Yeah.
That's the voice you got to listen to. We have to listen to as clinicians, because that's the mums telling us they get it. You know what I mean?
And it's also mothers more. We find that mothers are always, through their own way, telling us how to heal their child, how to help heal their child, if we listen really carefully.
So we're actually the smart ones, and you're just like
Exactly.
some portal of
Exactly.
We just had to go through. We got all the pieces of paper. To
Yeah. But it's interesting because I do feel like this is such an important part of it, which is no one else is doing it. Like, I've been to the best dentists ever. Sorry, Jalal, I haven't really been to you, but they're like, this is 100%, like with conviction, this is what needs to happen. This is the best, safest, most holistic thing you can do. But it's still not right. So this is a whole nother, just beautiful way of looking at things and, simplifying it, but understanding it, like going much deeper and trying to understand what's actually happening to so many of these kids. I know when I came in and seen you guys, you were like, I've got so many ideas on why this is all happening, but I'm just not going to go there. It's too much. And I was like, I'm going to save that for the podcast. So like, I would love to hear like why you think these things are happening to kids. Like, why are we seeing so much crowding and struggling with breathing, like almost
restriction,
just
like
struggling,
movement of tongue and lip. I mean, we've spoken about lip ties and tongue ties in a previous episode. I can try and reference that. My brain's not there right now.
Don't bother, just go listen to it.
Go listen to it. Yeah. Flick through, you'll see midline revolution. But and it just seems to be like an explosive condition where you never heard of lip ties or tongue ties.
Not even just that, but breathing. Like
the
lack of being able to breathe properly.
Feed and breathe at the same time.
But I know these problems have been there for a long time. Like, I know my brother, my partner, like all these people had their bits just cut out, like tonsillectomies and all that stuff, because that was just like
the way it was done.
I'm sure that was as far as the knowledge would expand in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, whatever. So, understanding why that's become such a thing or how we got here. Apart from the obvious, like we're living in a modern, very...
Jalal was just about to go into that, so...
Sunlight, water, grounding deuterium. What?
Melanin. So I guess the really important thing first is to understand, well, how does the system actually work? And so we've touched on that with the primary respiratory mechanism earlier, and how the movement of the cranial bones, particularly the bones at the back of the head, actually drive the forward growth of the jaws and the face. So that's the first thing. So then now that we understand how that works, what happens if something locks up the movement of the cranial bones? And the most common reason that we see is a birth trauma. And so it could be baby was engaged for 7 hours, and then it resulted in an emergency C-section, and they had a cord wrapped around their neck, etc. And baby made it, but like engaged for 7 hours, like what's that going to do to the cranium? It's going to compress the cranium. And so then the bones are not going to move as well. And so we have a locked cranium, which means smaller jaws, which means crowded teeth. And so we have a misaligned smile in a misaligned head. And so we can't just straighten out the smile without focusing on straightening out the head, which is obviously where Cole comes in. So like that's an example of a trauma which is birth related, but there could be other traumas as well. Like, what are some of the examples of traumas you've seen, like from sports and stuff?
Yeah. Well, in my head, I'll answer that question in a sec, but I don't know if it wasn't there in the 80s and 90s. Because in my case, for example, like I grew up with tragic sleep disordered breathing. So I was always tired. I was always you know, had no energy. I had brain fog. I couldn't concentrate. Like, I have 2 master's degrees. My HSC mark was 52, like tertiary entrance thingy. 52. Well, yours about 99.
I'm sure he's dying to tell us.
Yeah, he is.
I was coughing it today.
Point is, I couldn't breathe at night, right? And everyone said, well, you got straight teeth, you must have had braces. But if you actually know what you're looking for in my straight teeth, they're not as good as they look. But yeah, I really struggled, but there wasn't any awareness of it. You know, it was just like, oh, he's just a grumpy teenager. So, but what happened to me, like, I was talking to my kids about this the other day, driving back from Sydney, and I took up oil painting when I was maybe 13, 14, something like that. So I used to sleep in the room with the terps and the oil paints. Actually, probably not that good for the airways. So toxicity is one of them. Birth strain's a biggie, but actual fact, my point is on the birth strain is, yeah, I have birth strain. It's locked in. Like, I actually have dents in the top of my head here from the forceps. And when I look at my baby photos, I'm like, holy moly, that's a pretty good inferior vertical strain. When I can see it plain as day, and I used to cry. They always gave me shit for crying all the time as a baby. I'm like, yeah, well, obviously I had a headache, right? So that stuff existed, you know. It's just
awareness.
it just wasn't diagnosed or wasn't looked at. And at the moment with the tongue thing, you've got a lot of people diagnosing, quotes, oral restrictions, and it's just one of those things where you're looking just at one tissue only. But there's a famous embryologist of Jalal's been talking about embryology, Blacksmith, and he said the body functions as a whole, and only as a whole must we attempt to understand it, right? So you can't just look at that and go, oh, that's a midline dysfunction there. That means we've got to undo that. Well, what other midline structures are there? You know, we were talking about the mechanism of the skull. There's a huge midline structure that runs, anchors into the skull, runs through the brain. And that is actually the start of that dura mater. So it ends up in the sacrum, which is, so your linea alba of your abdominal, the central tenon of your diaphragm. There's heaps of midline structures. So what's going on with those midline structures before you start working on these ones? Yeah. So there's birth strain, there's things where, what was it the other day? My husband dropped him down a flight of stairs in a trolley. He was pulling him up the stairs in a trolley, and when he was 2, and the handle broke. Not the husband's fault, right? Come on, ladies. And the kid,
I was actually thinking classic fun dad.
Yeah, that's
wrong.
it. Yeah. We always get blamed. It's always when you're looking after them. But if kid fell down a flight of stairs when he was 2 years old. So like toddlers have accidents, crashes, things fall on their head. Yeah. And the other big one is kids falling on their butts. So if that dura is anchored in the sacrum, which it anatomically is, if you have a big trauma onto your sacrum itself, that can affect this whole mechanism that Jalal was referring to.
That's so interesting.
And that affects the body's self-healing capacity, right? So all of a sudden, I'll give you a classic example. When I was a student many years ago, I used to get by teaching kids breathing and also face exercises. This family came in, they were from outback Queensland, and she's like, we've got just recurring ear infections, just constant. And then we're on the antibiotics, and everyone knows what antibiotics does to guts. But like this thing was constant. And I just, it was one of the first times I trusted my osteopathic palpation, and I could feel that this kid had had a sacral fall. And I said, look, I'm just going to ask you this. Has she ever had a big fall onto the butt? She's like, yeah, she fell when she was 18 months from the slide, and because they're in the outback, she fell onto the ground, which was as hard as concrete because it was in the desert,
Drought.
Yeah, drought, smack onto her butt. I said, how old was she? She's like 18 months. I said, when did the ear infection start? 18 months. I was like, there it is. It's the sacrum, right? And I got my mentor to come in at the time and treat her because I wasn't really treating osteopathically at the time. Kid fell asleep during the treatment, stayed asleep for 4 hours after that.
Wow.
Body's self-healing capacity, right? What do we need to do to heal? We that's what we do at night. We heal ourselves. So she just fell asleep. So that's a classic example of a like structural impact causing, and you might say, oh, but that's the butt, how does that affect the ears? Well, the ears run through the temporals, and the temporals, in our theory at least, mirror the sacroiliac joints. So through that dural connection, she'd actually locked up the bones that the ear canal goes through. So that's why she was getting part of the reason she was getting the OM, otitis media.
That is so interesting.
Wild, huh?
Yeah. I'm like also freaking out a little bit because I really want all my kids to learn how to snowboard, and that's just like constant butt impact.
Yeah.
Just have a weekly osteo session with Cole.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, actually, while we're here, I just want to like squash a little thing that people often say when we feel like we need to outsource all the time, is like, in my thought, it's if we didn't do this, I mean, like what I'm trying to say is, what would be life without this type of thing? In my opinion, it would just be we're not living, like there's no longevity, or like we're just kind of minimizing our potential. But if we added this, it's not like people always just used to, I don't know, what would the contrast be without it? Like our parents who didn't really do this stuff, they just, like, what are we trying to achieve by doing it?
Well, that's the quantum kid. We're trying to raise my whole life goal. Sorry, Jalal, but my whole life goal, I realised, was to not let kids work out like I worked out. And it took me 35 years to unplug myself and go, wow, what is actually wrong with me? And now I can live life. Like, I started living at 35 when I fixed a lot of these issues. And so then I went, whoa, geez, like, what if we could start that from 4? Like, what if the kids had an intrinsic wisdom and they knew what to listen to instead of all this shit they're bombarded with, and they could have an intrinsic sense of self by just getting in their breath and going, yeah, that's not right for me, kind of like what you did. Imagine growing up knowing that, instead of having to transmute it into a generation of women that trust their intuition. It just was. You know what I mean? That's my goal.
Because I feel like we're in this super ancestral trending moment and everyone's like, yeah, but if you just did what the cavemen did, we wouldn't even need any of these things. But we obviously
well, we'd live till 30 as well.
That's what I mean. So like that's the contrast. I just wanted to squash it because people often say, yeah, but like what are you going to do? It's not really sustainable having that every week, and like do we really need it? Is it just like an opportunistic thing from these, professionals? And I'm like, yeah, but also we're living differently, and we know so much now.
But bringing it back to, we're all kind of trying to reestablish our intuition. Like sometimes it's nice to have a little hand. Sometimes it's nice to outsource a little bit.
100%.
We're doing a lot.
Yeah.
Bring it back to just what we do in life at the moment and everything that we're trying to undo, relearn, and continue on with your basic life stuff. It's a lot. Sometimes it's nice to just go to someone who's done all that work.
About like getting a cleaner and stuff though.
Yeah, I am.
Start the dishwasher.
Yeah. What I'm talking about, babe, is like longevity. Like, how do we have a long, healthy life?
But in terms
I get
of
it. We're going to get
well.
cleaners after
But
this.
you bring the kid up. You bring the kid up.
Yeah.
With a vitality that's so strong that they go snowboarding, they fall on their butt 15 times, and their vitality is that strong that they just body overcomes it. And if after 2 or 3 weeks you get back and they're like, Mum, my leg hurts still, or my back hurts, and you go, oh, well, we'll get some help. And then one session for 30 minutes, if the kid's vital, boom, you overcome it.
As opposed to sitting through uni being like,
yep.
Yeah, and it all
brain
manifesting
frying and just not being clear, having that brain power.
What do you think it does for an 18-year-old to get 52 in the HSC? They don't feel that empowered.
My cutoff was 50 for anyone that I worked with, so you just made it.
Yeah, sweet. I didn't tell you that, that's why.
Wasn't a prerequisite to him replying to the email.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I think it's one other aspect about the quantum kid is not just the structural side of things, but we're really educating children and parents about all of these other really important topics and knowledges regarding longevity. I mean, longevity is a buzzword these days, and there's a lot of prominent doctors who are pushing out, as far as I'm concerned, garbage regarding what longevity is about. But longevity really hinges on light, and I know we've done a big conversation on light already, but like we talk to the kids and the parents about safe sun exposure, about what nutrition is. I mean, the number of times during a week when Cole and I work together where we have parents say, oh yeah, our kids are eating healthy. And so then our next question is, what does healthy eating look like? And it's like 3 Wheat Bix, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, okay, let's sit down and have a conversation about Wheat Bix, what's in Wheat Bix, etc., and what's an alternative to Wheat Bix, which would still, give the child the nutrients that they need and a bit of protein and this and that. And these small shifts, and we do it with love, we don't do it with judgment, but those small shifts are like helping to give the body the fuel that it needs to then carry out the growth and guidance and healing that primary mechanism does. So it's not just a dental and osteopathic type of care. It's like definitely whole body approach.
Mm.
I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about my son, for instance. I mean, we started working with my son in July. He's proudly announces that he's the first quantum kid patient. So he's 7 years old, and for at least 9 months leading up until July, he was struggling with like nasal discharge, and he wasn't having recurrent ear infections, but definitely like every morning he was waking up snotty, and he wasn't sick. And rightfully so, it was driving my wife nuts, because she's just like, Jalal, this is your domain. Like, you're an airways dentist. What the hell are you doing? And
I'm so happy to hear this. Like, I'm just like, the smart guy got it wrong even.
Fix the child.
And as a clinician that's an airways dentist, I was like genuinely scratching my head, just going, what's going on? And I had just started him in an expander. And then I met Cole in June, I think it was. And then really I quickly got what Cole was talking about. I'm like, okay, well, we need to shift. And so we pivoted into ditching the expander. He conveniently lost the expander, which I didn't get upset at him about, because he was lucky, because we were going into this Vivos appliance that Cole and I use. But basically, within at least 3 days, he was wearing the appliance while he was sleeping. It wasn't in all night. He'd probably have it in for 3 or 4 hours, and then he'd push it out. But despite that, within 3 days, all the discharge had gone. Mm-hmm. And so he was waking up with like a clear nose. He was breathing through his nose again, and like obviously wifey was happy wife, happy life, all of that stuff. But for me, it was like, okay, this stuff really works. Like this isn't just like a theory. This isn't just woo-woo. This is genuinely like proper healing. But it's like as parents, like kids will go through ups and downs. So like, and he had a really good run up until about October, November, and then he had a bit of trouble at school. One of the boys was giving him a bit of grief, and so it was affecting him emotionally, and the symptoms returned. And so Cole and I had a chat about it. Cole did a bit of kinesiology. We both do kinesiology in the clinic, but because it was my son, I didn't want to get involved, so Cole was doing it. And Cole was kind of testing things and worked out that it was what was going on at school that was affecting him. And so wifey and I kind of put in a plan to deal with that. And within a few weeks, things had cleared again, and he was back to normal. And then another month later, he was like back to square one. It was nasal discharge, etc. And once again,
she started giving me stuff because she was sitting in the clinic room while I was treating him.
Yeah. Cole had worked out, and this is what I think Cole is absolutely brilliant, is that when he's holding a head, he's not just feeling for the movement of the bones, he's listening to the body. It's quite powerful to watch Cole work, and he's listening to the child. He's listening to that primary mechanism, and that mechanism tells him what he needs to do. And so basically Cole worked out that my son's temporal bones, which are the bones on the side of the head, they were just locked up because he'd been clenching because of the frustration of what he'd been going through in October, November. And so this was just a residual structural locking in his temporal bones because of an emotional thing a few months back. And so Cole released the temporal bones and got the bones to work nicely with the oral appliance. And I kid you not, literally with like the next morning he was up, he was clear, it was like he was a completely different person. So I'm telling that story for a few things. I go through ups and downs as a parent, like all parents do. And when symptoms kind of come back, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same thing. It could be something else. I mean, everyone's an onion, and as you peel away the first layer, deeper layers come to the fore, and we've got to peel away those. And I think it's really important for parents that are listening to appreciate that about their children, because they're not just dealing with the difficulties of what it is to go through life these days as a child, with the the blue light and this programming and all this type of stuff, but a lot of the children have taken on generational trauma from their parents, and they're coping with bullying and all this type of stuff, or social media for the older kids. And so we really need to be cognizant of that as parents, as clinicians, when we're looking after the kids, and supporting them along the way.
That's amazing, because it just really shows that it's so much bigger and there's so many more, things that it can be, as opposed to my experience of just walking into like the best dentist. And being
We're going to bring him over here.
But also,
let's bring him in just to be like, listen here. What were you thinking?
You two in a room.
No, but it was like there's nothing of that. There's not even any like really communicating with the child, or it's just like, all right, this is it. You're here, obviously. This as well. Yeah, cool. We're gonna. Yeah, I've heard of this breathing thing before. Like, let's just get this done.
Where do you hear the
like?
Everything needs to be a certain measurement, and everyone needs to fit that same measurement.
Don't get me started.
Your jaw is a little smaller than the other guy's jaw.
Oh no, we've like ranged the average. I'm actually listening to like all these stories and relating it back to me, because and Mum, if you listen to this, I forgive you.
You did what you could, the best you could.
Yeah. I know you did the best. But like, I've gone through expanders, braces. I have been a jaw clencher my whole entire life. Definitely smashed my tailbone a whole bunch of times, including in childbirth, and I was pulled out with forceps, and I'm like, man, maybe I just need to fix all of that, and like I'll just be
Start again.
I'll start floating through life.
it's possible.
Togger, we're in for a couple of bills.
Yeah. But the thing is too, hey, like this drives me nuts, is that how long does it take to grow, let's just say the head, the skull itself, about 23, 24, 25 years, A lot of it's done by 6, right? About 50%, but that's what the textbooks say, so it depends which book you read, but like, again, averages. But think about it, if you look at a kid when they're 4, how old's your oldest? 8?
Almost 8,
8, yeah. Like, I've got anywhere from 5 to 20. Like, I've got 4 kids. And if I think about, say, my oldest, a 20-year-old, when she was 4, like, she looks completely different to what she does now. And she's still not quite finished growing her skull. Like, it's pretty much done. But, like, if you take a snapshot, and then how she looked when she was 9, like if you take a snapshot at any given point in that time frame and judge how she's going to look when she's 20, or how she should have looked when she was 2, off all that, like based on a few numbers, it actually doesn't make sense, because you need to understand the stages of growth and how they're supposed to look when they're, getting just before they get teeth as bubs, then when they're sort of 5, 6 and they start losing their teeth, how should that look? And it doesn't, how they are then is not going to dictate how they look when they're 20. It does, but at the same time, you can't judge how they look then and then project that out 20 years and go, if they're not 38 millimeters, by the time they're 8 years old, they're going to be stuffed when they're 20, It's like my oldest daughter, if she's listening, hope she forgives me, but she had, she was a mouth breather. She had the fillings, the stainless steel caps and all that. And I didn't realise at the time that was mouth breathing. But like, she's gone through, and she's had some kidney issues and stuff. She's gone through all this stuff, and like, sorry to say, but she's beautiful. Like, she's a really beautiful looking young lady.
You don't need to apologise.
No, I know,
She'll
but
forgive
I'm
you.
boasting, but so I could have looked when she was 9 and had a freak out and gone and done all the things and stuff. But like, it's a process, it's a growth thing. Like, It's like adulting is a long process, isn't it? You know, still
Still
working
learning.
out.
Yeah.
It doesn't really stop at 25 though, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking 45 is like a sweet spot.
Nah, sorry, I'm past
Alright.
that. Doesn't stop there.
Surely we know some stuff by then.
No, never. I feel like it's just forever. We're going to be like, really?
So when we're expanding, because I just want to touch on this for a little bit, like what is happening? Like what are we, like we're trying to fix it, but what are we really doing? Essentially, I know you've covered the basics of like, you're just forcing something to do what it essentially doesn't want to do.
So the premise behind expansion is that we've got a child that's a mouth breather and they've got enlarged tonsils and adenoids, etc. We need to make it easier for them to breathe. And the nose is actually a cavity that's primarily encased by the upper jaw. So like the side wall of the nose and the floor of the nose is the upper jaw. So let's make the upper jaw bigger. That's going to make the nose bigger. It's going to be easier for the child to breathe. It makes sense. It's logical, right? But the upper jaw is one bone of 22 inside the skull. And so when you expand that too quickly, all the other bones in the skull are getting squished into place. So it's like, well, squished out of place. So it's like, I kind of liken it to, there's a lift with a capacity for 10 people, and then 2 other people have joined into the lift, and everyone's got to squish against the wall inside the lift to accommodate the 2 extra people. And so all of a sudden you get all of these strains, and, you know, someone's got a bit of body odor and someone's, you know, got a bit of flatulence, and like it just gets messy. So that's...
Are we talking about this room right now? And just me on the body odor front, like arms down.
So that is that's fundamentally what is happening inside the head. And there are studies to show that like one of the key bones just behind here is called the vomer. So when we expand the upper jaw too quickly, the vomer collapses. What we see as well is that when we expand too quickly, we have one side expand more than the other, so we don't get a symmetrical expansion. And so it's like, I kind of think if someone gave me all the bones and the powers to grow a face and a skull, I would have no idea where to start. I would have no idea what order to do things in. Do I do this bone first or that? Like the only force, the only power that knows that is the primary mechanism. So why don't we just lean on that? Why don't we just unlock that inside each child and let that do it, and it'll do it in its own time. And then like there's this whole idea of well, there's different body types, right? Some people are a bit taller, some people are a bit heavier, some people are a bit more petite. Why are we making every single child have the same 38 millimeters between the first molars in the upper jaw? Like, why are we going for that target for every single person, for every single child? It just seems like absolute codswallop as far as I'm concerned, because it's just not respectful of the fact that we have different body types. There's ectomorphs, there's endomorphs, there's mesomorphs. I mean, Cole's much taller than I am, although I'm pretty solid on an arm wrestle with him. But
untrained.
But he's got a bigger mouth than me, and that's because that mouth is fit for his frame. You know, whereas what we're doing, and this is airways dentistry, this is functional dentistry. These guys know what they're doing, except they've graduated from appreciating that the teeth are held in by jaws, and behind the jaws is the airway. And so that's a big graduation in thinking, but they've stopped at that, and they haven't and I was like this as well 18, 24 months ago, but they haven't realized that, well, that's all hanging off the front of the head, and the head runs the show. But then that means, okay, now I've got to go and start with working with a cranial osteopath, but I've got a mad ego, so I don't want to work with one, and, you know, I don't have space in my office for one. And so that's kind of what's going on, because they have to pivot their entire way of practice. And it means, honestly, if we talk money, it means less money, because this approach is a lot slower. The devices are a lot cheaper.
So is it like, would you work in conjunction with an expander, or is the whole thing a nightmare?
And let's go back to the start,
back.
like a step backwards as well, to understand what is it that the head has to grow for? Why does the head grow?
All that information.
The brain.
The brain,
Big
because
brain.
the brain's growing, yeah? The brain's growing. That's why the baby's head grows a lot in the first year, because there's so much neurocognitive development going on in year 1, right? But that keeps going. So the skull has to get bigger to accommodate the growth of the brain. That's why we have sutures in all the cranial bones, right? And what's cool is the back of the skull, or the back part of the skull, not the face part, comes from a bone called membranous bone that's a bit denser, yeah? And the face bones come from a more malleable bone, cartilaginous, but it's not quite as dense. So it's like the back of the head is actually the engine of the growth. So as the brain grows, the back of the head drifts the face forward and the face molds. And if the muscles are doing their job, they act, and they're balanced, they act like tent ropes. Yeah, so they create the right, what we call length tension, which pulls on the bone. So therefore, then your chewing comes into it, you know. So when you chew and you chew properly, mouth shut, the muscles are tensioning and they're developing, right? That's why toddlers and stuff is so important for them to be chewing. Yeah, that's why good breathing comes into play. Yeah, because that also having lip seal, tongue position is so important, right? So that's where all these little bits and pieces of the puzzle come into it. But what's really doing is the engine back in the back of the head that's the engine room. It's growing and it's drifting the face, and the whole thing's working in harmony. What happens is when we get teeth and we get an arch form, top and bottom arch form, they actually, part of their function is they act as a spring. So a spring or an arch, like in a Roman arch above a column or something like that, it acts to absorb the force and distribute the force so the whole thing doesn't fall down. Well, that's what your teeth are. So you do the osteopathy, I do the dentistry. The teeth arch, when you bite on something hard, that arch disperses the force. Where does the force go? Into the back of the skull, right? So that's why you can get away with putting an expander in it. So it's soft, it's slightly softer bone, but it's got this spring, and those forces are going to be dispersed, and you can do the expansion thing. But here's the problem. As you use that dental arch, that force is supposed to be absorbed and balanced at the back of the skull. So if you have those burst strains or that fall off the swing and the back of the skull's locked up, where's the force going to go? And that's where you get tension. And that's where you get the issues that come with or after it. Now, and when we work with adults, Jalal, how many are we seeing that are post, God bless our orthodontic colleagues, but how many are post-ortho issues?
Like pretty much everyone.
Pretty much. Okay, so you've had extractions, you've had I've had expanders twice, blah, blah, blah. And you get, I put my hands on the back of their head and it's like holding that rock over there. It's just like, oh, no wonder that didn't work, because the growth and the engine room is locked up. And I see that with kids as well. So same thing, you can just unlock that, use a relatively inexpensive device that we use, and it creates a spring force, and that's dispersed. And when the kids are asleep, they grow, and it's like that simple.
The key thing though is that the force that the appliance that we use, the force that it delivers, it mimics biology. So it's not overdoing it. Whereas an expander is purely mechanical. It's like you're turning a screw because the dentist said turn it every day or once a week or whatever, and it's completely arbitrary. When do we stop? When do we not stop? Whereas with this appliance, we're just delivering literally like a pulse type force, similar to what the body's natural physiological growth is. So it's that big concept between physiological growth and mechanical growth. We tend to use appliances. We always use appliances that mimic physiology. So that's a key thing. And what I think another really important point, just to touch on the post-ortho type stuff, so like the issues that we see in children even that have had braces, is that we have to understand why were the teeth misaligned in the first place. Okay, because the jaw was small. And so why is the jaw small? Because the cranium's locked. So the teeth are actually like a projection of what's going on in the head. But the head's smart, like the cranium is smart, it knows what to do. It's put those teeth there for a reason. You know, one tooth is a little bit forward, this one's a little bit rotated, this one's rotated this way. The cranium's done that on purpose. So it's a misalignment. It doesn't look that good. It's a misalignment, but it's functional, right? And so what we as dentists and orthodontists do is we take that functional misalignment and we turn it into a beautiful straight alignment, but it's dysfunctional because the cranium's like, why'd you move the teeth there? I needed them back there. And so then the cranium's like, hold on, guys, I'm boss. So the cranium actually starts to move the teeth back. And that's when you start to see the relapse in the orthodontics. And so then the orthodontist and the dentist got really smart, and they were like, okay, we'll just put a wire behind the teeth. That'll solve the issue. And so then the cranium's like, you bastard. You've locked me up there. I can't even do the compensation that I would have done to relapse everything so that everything's functional again. And so then what the cranium is forced to do is pick on another part of the body. And so it could be the left jaw joint, or it could be the right side of the neck, or it could be the C1, the first cervical vertebra, which the head sits on, or it could be the right shoulder, or the left hip, or the tailbone. And so all of a sudden that person is then locked into that misalignment, and they can never get out of it. And they'll go to a physio or an osteo or a chiro, and they'll get that adjusted, and they'll feel great for like a day or a week or so. And then they'll be back to square one. They'll be back in that misalignment, and they'll be back in pain, and they're trapped. And the only way out, honestly, is to see a team like Cole and I, just because we can realign the body by as well as realigning the mouth at the same time to get that person out of the problems that they're in. And we've been working together for properly for 4 months, and even within 4 months, we've had some staggering results with some of the adults and older children that we've treated.
So just to quantify for all of our listeners, we're not just quantum kids. We can be quantum adults as well.
All adults are kids, aren't they? At heart.
Yes, that's fair.
But true, we treat kids, we treat adults. For the kids, we kind of call it craniofacial, the guidance of craniofacial development, whereas for the adults, we call it craniofacial rehabilitation.
And if you can't get to Byron, you're pretty much screwed. Oh, Sydney. You can get to
Sydney.
Sydney.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing as well. I'd hate to limit it to people feeling like, well, if it is not accessible, what should I do? Because I've definitely felt like that before, and I feel like it's not helpful at all. Like, oh, that person lives in America. Cool. I'm not going to go there, am I? So, how can people tap into this without seeing you in the flesh?
I think the most important thing would be to see a cranial osteopath.
Not a dentist.
Not a dentist.
I was just testing you.
Nice. But also, excuse me. What's interesting is I got a message on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago from a cranial osteopath in Canada who, and then I sort of went, oh, you've got to work with a dentist. She said, I've got a dentist. He just fit me with an ALF appliance, which is the one that we use, which is a osteopathic dental appliance developed by osteopaths and dentists together. So it's weird. Like you start bringing this stuff out there, and she actually got me off a different video that wasn't related to this thing, but I said, oh, this is what we do, and so she's gone back off to talk to the dentist. And that's in Canada. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and
they're out there, people.
They're out there. Yeah,
They're out there.
And there's dentists we joke about the dental ego and stuff, and it is joking, but there's a lot of dentists that really care and that really want to know and that really want to help people, and it's just about changing that mindset, which is part of what we're wanting to do. It's part of our mission, is to go, hey, there's this and there's this, and
What is the mission, Cole?
The mission.
We wrote it down.
Yeah, we did. It's to have every child insisting on Quantum Kid, bullying their parents,
and the parents demanding it.
Yeah,
and so that's why we're so grateful for the airtime that you guys are giving us, because it just helps to create awareness in the wider community about this is how you bring dentistry out of the dark ages. This is what you've got to do. And so the more and more parents that know this, they're going to demand it of their dentist. They're going to demand it of their cranial osteopath. You guys need to see what those folks over at Quantum Kid are doing, and you guys need to do that in Brisbane, or you guys need to do that in Adelaide.
Because we're equally guilty, right? So we did 2 classes in 5 years on intraoral release. So which osteopaths are looking inside the mouth and going, oh, look at that, you've got a little, higher on the premaxilla there. That's going to mean this, and this. No wonder your tooth does that, and that. And if you learn to do it, you can look at someone's smile and see what's wrong with their head. It's wild. Don't
Are
smile.
you guys?
I know.
Already
Oh
done,
my
guys.
God.
Already
It's-
done.
I
You
can
guys have
feel
been
like you
mapped
guys
out.
have analysed us for the last oh my God, do you see
Well, you
her
are sitting
upper?
across from
Did you
it.
see that eyebrow? The other eyebrow? It's very unaligned.
Tries,
No,
mate,
don't worry.
mate,
I'm
mate.
very about it.
Right.
Well, because I studied physiotherapy, and
nice.
like when I was studying physio, I left it for similar reasons as
Yeah.
seeing some things. But when I was studying physio, every single person I looked at walking, I'd be judging their gait, like every single person. And I do it to my kids now too, and I'm like, can you just walk to me again?
It drives my wife crazy. She's like, when you meet people, can you not look them up and down and look at their teeth and analyze them? Can you just like meet them like a
get to
normal
know
person?
them.
Yeah, like conversation. I'm like, I can't, but look at that sphenoid. I mean, seriously.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Bad
Actually, one thing I
habits.
wanted to ask, is it true that, because this is like what I see all the time now, is that people will say, and I feel like this must scare the shit out of a lot of mums because they're looking at it like, oh, my kid has that. But is the spacing of the teeth like the absolute be all? Like, so if you're a 4-year-old who hasn't lost a tooth, all the teeth don't have big gaps, is that 100% that kid has a problem? And should
25.
what?
Let them get to
25.
25.
25. No, my question then would be straight away be, and Jalal have a comment too, but my question would be, how big are the parents? Because if the parents are 6'4" and the kid's gotten 0 gaps and a little bit of crossbite or something, then yeah, I'd be worried. But if the parents are small, petite people, then maybe those gaps are going to be smaller or not very big at all compared to the one with the, it's when you see
When
it.
being little is a bonus.
Yeah, it's when you see a kid come in who's, okay, let's say average size, and they have like real tight gaps next to their teeth, and yeah, it's like that's something we want to address.
Interesting.
Jalal, you got to comment on?
I agree with that. I think the more and more that I practice, the more and more that I research about nutrition and dentistry and all these types of things, we have to continually come back to the same approach, which is that all care has to be patient-specific, body type specific. Colin and I are working on a few things from the nutrition side of things. So, because, there's all this stuff in nutrition out there where it's like, you've got to be carnivore, or you've got to be more fiber or more carbs and repeat and all this type of stuff. And it's just an absolute maze out there. But Colin and I, we do a bit of work with adults regarding body type, and like there are specific body types that can thrive on a carnivore diet, or can thrive on a vegetarian diet, or can thrive on a high carb diet. You just got to understand, are you that body type or not? So it's more these types. I get asked all the time in DMs and stuff like that. Oh, I've got this problem. What do you think? And it's like I don't know you. Like you need to come for a consultation so that I can understand who you are, what are you like emotionally, what's your body type, and then make recommendations based off that.
But it is ultimately true. Like by 5, a kid should have gaps in their baby teeth. Yeah, but don't measure them to the nearest point.
1 mil,
tenth of
too
a
small.
millimeter. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're in almost wrap up zone.
Aw.
I know, but I
Don't be
really,
a
really
buzzkill,
want to know.
Keshia.
I
Come on,
know.
let's just hang out for
Just keep going.
Keep going.
But we're under the lights, and the light outside is.
Yeah, we got to ground. We got to go ground.
As soon as it's sunset time, we're out of here, right?
Thumb sucking.
Oh,
Because actually, and I'll bring this back because I brought my son. I don't know if you remember, because it was a one-off.
yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, Rue. And he walked it like, I think he walked in and you were like, is it a dummy or a thumb? Like that's the first
Sorry.
thing he said.
Sorry,
Brutal. I'd be like, oh God.
No, it's just
mother
like,
guilt.
oh no. And he was like, actually my first 2 had dummies. So we were like, never again. We're not going to do that again. Because we didn't know better and learnt later. And then my 3rd child ended up sucking his thumb, and he still does. It's definitely a comfort thing. But yeah, take us through it so I can be a bit more serious about working on him not to do it anymore.
There's a couple of pieces to it. So firstly, just let's talk quickly about pacifiers. They can be very useful for certain infants, especially preemie infants, to keep the suck mechanism going, especially for mothers who've suffered with P&D as well, postnatal depression, because it just helps calm the baby and that helps keep the mother calm. So there's no judgment on pacifiers, okay? But I used to have a day job when I was at uni, and I did an extensive literature review on pacifiers. And basically, in a nutshell, they're not great. And if you can stop them at 6 months, it's best to stop them at 6 months. Prior to 6 months, it's maybe okay, especially if it keeps you sane. But best not to start. But if you have to, then after 6 months, it becomes deleterious. It becomes problematic. Yeah. So the thumb sucking, there's two parts to it. One is it works as an orthopedic appliance. Remember I was talking about that spring? It's using a spring force, except that the muscles are doing the opposite to chewing. So the muscles are sucking in on that thumb. So that length tension balance, those tent ropes as such, the forces are going in. So that's going to shape the jaw to go up. And if the jaw goes up, it's going to be narrower. You're not going to get those nice spaces. Yeah. So it acts as an orthopedic appliance that doesn't really help us. There's another part to it though, because what you said was soothing. Yeah. And that's true too, because what happens is it's what they're actually trying to do in part, and then what becomes the habitual loop is they're actually they're becoming cranial osteopaths, but they need to do maxillary spreads, not maxillary drives upwards. But what happens is they're actually, through a couple of different joint connections, they're stimulating. So the pituitary gland sits on the back of the sphenoid bone. The sphenoid bone goes across the front of your face, and there's a little hook and the pituitary sits on that. It's got a little stalk that connects to the hypothalamus. So there you've got like the master regulator of thirst, temperature, that sort of stuff, is the hypothalamus, which is connected to the pituitary, which is the master hormone regulator. So what they're actually doing with the thumb is trying to drive hormonal function, which is why it's soothing. Yeah. But that's probably not the best way to do it. But it becomes a habitual loop, and then it affects dentition. So it is a habit that's not conducive to growth, particularly after that 6 month, or particularly after suck habits should recede. So the suck reflexes are for feeding, for breastfeeding. And especially after weaning, those reflexes, they're called infant reflexes. They should recede back, basically they should recede so that I can't think of the right word, but the right reflexes come forward for that stage of development. Yeah. It's sometimes if there's a prolonged suck habit, you get those reflexes retained, and they can actually affect concentration and neurodevelopment.
All right.
Is that enough mother guilt?
No, well, I think the one thing that you'd pointed out in that session was that his teeth are like, they've gone on an angle and it's almost created a gap where his thumb is kind of resting on the teeth. And once I saw that, now I can't unsee it. And I'm like, how do I...
That's probably what Jalal was itching to talk about, an open bite. That's what thumb creates.
Yeah, so the open bite where when the teeth come together, they're not coming together. And so that creates a space for the tongue to push through. It cultivates mouth breathing. Obviously, the thumb is still always there to perpetuating the habit. So easily correctable, because once again, it's about understanding what is the actual reason why the child is thumb sucking in the first place. And I mean, there are other habits as well that kids have, like they might chew their t-shirt or they bite their nails, and all of that I feel is related to them just trying to relieve cranial strains or to help like with their sensory, sensory inputs, or maybe it's to do with the vagus nerve, etc. And so
the chewing it stimulates the subdiaphragmatic part of the vagal nerve. So the vagus is a big parasympathetic nerve, regulates breathing, heart rate, and digestion.
She'll just pick up something and be like,
Yeah, that's it.
What are you doing all that for?
So
and like,
she's-
so obviously there's something that she just,
Yeah, she's telling her brain she's chewing on something, so the brain goes, "Oh, time to get ready to digest," and it becomes a little more parasympathetic because it's getting ready to digest because it's chewing.
That's so funny because Humphrey just recently went through
chewing
a
his
stage
stuff.
of like just chewing his
Oh.
top, like his t-shirt. And I was like, "Are you mineral deficient right now? Like, what?
are you cognitive deficient? I'm just unaware here.
It's like, but you know how like sometimes in pregnancy people
Make weird stuff.
Is it pica where like women just start eating dirt and like
I've not experienced
or
that.
like
I've heard that.
detergents
I've
and
heard of
stuff.
that.
Yeah, and then it's meant to be a mineral deficiency. And I was like, he was just chewing his top. I'm like, what are you doing? But it was like a really short period of time, and then he's not been doing it.
Well, it's also a great mechanism to cease the thumb sucking. So
Chewing on t-shirts.
no, getting chewy. Like the Munchie is a great device. I used to. That was the said company that I was working for when I did that literature review because we were trying to get kids to chew on those appliances as opposed to sucking on a pacifier. So that's a great thing. There's tools like that out there that you can get them to chew, so they get that soothing mechanism, but instead of the backwards growth of sucking, they get the forwards growth of chewing. Cool.
Very
huh?
cool.
Mm.
You've given me a lot to think about. Thanks, Cole.
So,
I feel like next time I want to talk about how important birth is,
yes.
which I know
So
you're both
important.
not doing any of that, but like the whole time,
Respect. Though.
like no, but just how, you know, like a decentralized birthing kind of minimizes all of that.
Trauma.
Yeah,
Potential trauma.
it's probably not a whole podcast, but there's a lot there.
Well,
I think we could get a whole pod
it puts
two
the
or
balance
three.
back into your intuition, doesn't it?
Mm.
You get it. So it's like from even from the moment of conception, it should be that level of like we trust this.
Mm.
And then when you have a home birth, it's completely like we trust you. Like my partner, she was giving birth and my 7-year-old son was upset, and between the contractions she said, "Come here, darling," and she's like, "I'm okay, I'm just doing this." And then she was parenting while birthing. It's like, what? Like talk about empowerment, you know what I mean? Like truly, yeah. That's a good podcast.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Let's get her on the podcast.
Yeah, she should come
Got a
in.
few more interviews
Well,
to
it's
do.
all we're talking about right now.
I know. And I like it. And, you know, I've got this incredible trick up my sleeve now where I can literally take any topic and bring it back to birth.
That's where it all starts, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's also interesting because for me, I've had those births almost 5 times now. And I've got a different situation. Like one of my kids who was born early, randomly, is still an incredible birth. He's like perfect teeth and like is, you know, I would consider perfect, even though I'm sure we could find something. But then, and they've all been breastfed for like multiple years, tandem, like good food. Like they're always outside, they're always bare feet. And I'm like, what is up with your breathing? Like how, what did I do wrong?
That's
But
why
there's
you
always,
don't
like-
trust the algorithm. That's the thing.
That's what I mean. Like if
seriously.
there was a textbook perfect, like I would have been ticking a lot of those boxes, but it wouldn't have equated to like the perfect product.
Yeah.
And so there's so much, you know, coming back and
so
forth.
much
And
can happen still.
yeah, and it's interesting to realize that.
But also remember Betty's super young and
All my kids are
Skull.
perfect.
yeah.
One of
But-
them
and-
can't
but,
breathe
like,
and like
Skulls just
yeah.
I'm gonna sit on this one. Skulls don't develop until 25. So like
Me
if there's
too.
something wrong, if it's still there at 25, we'll address it. No.
Don't listen to Keshia,
No, but
guys.
don't
I
wait till you're
think-
35. Hello, like don't wait till 35 to
Yeah.
not to wake up
Yeah.
like every morning feeling like complete rat shit every
Yeah.
morning, especially when you're a teenager or your early 20s when you should be firing. Like I still did stuff and I still played sport and stuff, but it was just those mornings were just torturous until I was like 35. Like we can deal with that at 5.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and the best thing about it for me, the best thing is I don't know. So like if I treat someone at 5 or teach them to breathe and they sleep way better, like we've got no idea where they would have been if they didn't do that. It's only where they're going, you know, and I love that. Just
Yeah.
mystery, like set sail, go. you know.
Chloe said something which I wanted to really reiterate, which is she said, all my kids are perfect. And we commonly have parents come in and they're like, so-and-so's mouth breathing and so-and-so's bedwetting and this and that. And they rattle off this like long list of problems. And like a lot of the time, Cole and I would turn to the kids and just say, first of all, there's nothing wrong with you, darling. Just to reinforce to the kids that there is nothing wrong with them and that they're just finding a way forward. And that's really reassuring for the kids. It's all the kids love us, and sometimes we even surprise ourselves in terms of some of the kids that we're able to work with. Like we've had some non-verbal children come in and, you know, the parents have been really like unsure, how is this appointment going to go? Are they going to even open their mouth, let alone allow an appliance to be tried in their mouth, etc. And like, we haven't failed yet, have we?
Yeah, not bad for two blokes with beards.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm sure we could go on forever.
Yes. No, but it has been brilliant listening to this. Especially, I love case studies.
Well, I find it the most helpful because mums get together and they're like, oh, I've noticed, or like, how did you deal with that? Or do you know anything about this? And it's, you know, often the way we find the way, or we're finding new things, or we're, you know, or we've realised, or it's suddenly we have trust in ourselves because we've realised something, and then the mums, you know, kind of reinforced that in us. Like, yes, you are right as the mother. So
I think too on that, like touching just quickly on what Jalal was saying too, you got to remember those things that are the quote unquote problems are functional. Mouth breathing's functional for that child. Bedwetting even at that point is functional for that child. That's how their system is coping and surviving and doing the best that it can. It's doing these things to remain functional. So there's nothing wrong with them. You've done nothing wrong. It's just that nudging and that simplicity that we were talking about before. And it's easy because they are vital, you know. It's just a couple of little small nudges.
It's rerouting.
And it's functional again.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a really good note to finish up on. Well, thank you, lads, for coming in.
Pleasure.
Absolute
Hosting
Chatting with us again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just to reiterate, if anyone is needing to reach out and wants to find you, where can they go?
We are on Instagram. the.quantum.kid is our handle. And we regularly post what we feel is some pretty powerful stuff on there.
And that's the same for the website, thequantumkid.com.au.
Excellent.
Are
And
you
we'll
guys
link to
doing,
that.
did I see that you were doing like online stuff? Or
We'll
is that
do
not
some
yet?
telehealth stuff, yeah.
What about, is there like a quantum online kid course or something? Did I see that?
Yeah, we have a few online courses
You do?
regarding, one is what we call Face Gym, which is basically a course that runs for about 8 weeks that helps the kids or retrains the kids on how to use their lips and how to use their tongue. So we're restoring kind of proper facial and oral muscle function. And that's going to be important in holding all of the changes that Cole and I are able to affect with the appliances, because there's no point making changes if we don't have the systems in place to hold it. So pretty much every second child needs that Face Gym. I probably need it as well. I
feel like I need it.
The other course we have is a breathing course, and Cole's put that together to really teach the children just how to use the right muscles to get the right biomechanics for breathing, which is super important because, as we know, breathing is central to life and survival. And that course is like, it's just a really easy one for kids to push through. When my kids are doing these courses, I'm always doing it with them as well. So it kind of cultivates better compliance if the mum and dad are doing them as well.
Turn into some fun games.
Especially for those people that can't come to the clinics. Those two things can really help. I mean, they've done that breathing course with literally hundreds of kids and got some crazy results, like stuff that's blown me away. Just changing breathing. Yeah.
Amazing.
So good.
Well, thank you again. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. And yeah, peace out. Thanks, everyone.
Be a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.